just starting a recording. Lovely. Okay. Letting everybody in now. Awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, everybody.
Oh, that's fun.
Lovely. Okay, well, hello, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us for this evening's discussion of Tammi Kirkness's new book, The Panic Button. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm currently broadcasting to you from, the Yagara and Turrbal people. I pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Before we begin tonight, and I hand you over to our speakers for this evening, I'd just like to quickly reiterate some of the information that I sent to you in the email with your link to join tonight's event. So you've all automatically been placed on mute, but this doesn't mean that we won't be having a Q&A session. We certainly will. It will just look a little bit different. So I'll ask that you send any questions that you have for Tammi to me via the chat box. It'll pop up any second now because I'm about to send you your link to purchase your copies of the Panic Button. So when I do, you'll see that chat box that you can use for the Q&A. I'd also just like to mention that we have a promotion on at the moment for all of our events attendees, and that is that for the next 24 hours, if you use the code EVENT at checkout on our website, then you'll receive 10% off your order. It is valid for the next 24 hours. So as I said, I'll post the link to purchase your copy of the Panic Button, and I recommend that you get in early to make the most of that offer. And so I would now like to introduce Tammi Kirkness. Tammi is a life coach, corporate wellness speaker, and presenter who combines evidence-based psychology with Eastern training. She specializes in helping people with high-functioning anxiety, which she experiences herself. She wrote this book for herself for when she needs her rational mind to coach her in times of panic. In conversation with Tammi tonight is Alexx Stuart. Alexx is an educator and change agent who founded Low Tox Life in 2010 after seeing the lack of transparency in our food system, personal care, and cleaning products. She's built a movement that's non-judgmental, positive, and says low tox peeps are a force to be reckoned with. A columnist for Wellbeing magazine, she is also a sought-after speaker and consultant to businesses committing to change for good. So, Tammi and Alexx, it is now my pleasure to hand over to you both for tonight's discussion.
Thank you, Emma.
Yeah, thanks so much, Emma. And welcome to this evening's conversation with author Tammi Kirkness. I have had the great pleasure of interviewing Tammi twice before for my podcast, Low Tox Life, and we've just had the most fantastic insights from Tammi both times, with so much incredible feedback on her clarity around the issue of not only anxiety, but also worry and overwhelm. So I think it couldn't give me more pleasure than to help you birth this book out into the world, Tammi, because I was literally the first believer in this book and was able to introduce you to my publisher because I just thought everyone needs this. And in leading a low tox life, food, body, home, and mind is the fourth pillar. And often we do all these wellness things and we don't look after this. It's like an afterthought, or it's shameful if you struggle around your mental health, either in a small or a really massive way. And Tammi just has the gift to cut straight down to what needs to happen to help move you forward. And she uses this herself, which is one of my favorite things about you, Tammi. It's not like you're just telling everybody else what to do and good luck. You literally practice what you preach, and that is rare in the world to know such an authentic person like you. So welcome to your book launch. This is exciting.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I wore fun earrings to celebrate, I must say.
You're looking super festive. It's fab. And tonight we're going to have a bit of a chat about this book, and I want to ask a few questions about how it came to life and the format in which it came to life. And then there'll be time at the end of our discussion, once you guys have a better idea of what this book is, how it can help us. Hello 2020, it's definitely not a year without its challenges. So it's a book for our times. And then we'll move into Q&A. So if you think of things, maybe make a little note, and we'll throw to Emma to share those questions with Tammi so that she can answer you directly tonight, which is always so great to be able to get that advice and support right now. Okay, so I'm very excited about this book. I don't think that's a guess. But what I want to ask you first is, given that it speaks very directly to anxiety and those challenging moments that can bring about a bit of worry, a bit of discomfort emotionally, let's dig the dirt on that story for you. How has worry and anxiety become something that you've had to get comfortable with moving through time and again in your own life?
Yeah, and first off, thank you again publicly for introducing me to your publisher. What a game changer. And we wouldn't be here tonight if it wasn't for you. So thank you. Thank you. As far as the anxiety story goes for me, is that I was always a very conscientious kid. You know, I really wanted to do well at school. I wanted to hand things in on time that were great and good quality. And particularly in primary school and high school, that's really applauded. You know, if you're a good student, the teachers dote on you, people want to be your friend. It's a people pleasers extravaganza, basically. And so I always kind of had this style of almost personality, and it helped. And if we act in a certain way and then we get rewarded for it, naturally we're going to continue those behaviors. And so those behaviors continued consistently, being a striver, a perfectionist, trying to get things right the first time. And it wasn't until actually when I was 20 years old and I was sitting at a recruitment consultant's desk where I worked in Melbourne. So anybody calling from Melbourne, our hearts go out to you that you're home for even longer. But I was sitting there and I was 20 and typing on my computer, and then out of the blue, I clutched my chest and I totally thought I was having a heart attack, and I was so frightened and freaked out so instantly that I picked up my handbag, walked past my boss's desk and said, "Oh, I'm just popping out." You know, I didn't even want to raise the alarm, and I got in a cab. I went straight to the emergency room, attached with EEG machines and a bunch of other things. And eventually the doctor came back and said, "The great news is your heart is totally healthy, healthier than perhaps another 20-year-old. The thing that maybe you haven't considered before is we're pretty certain you've just had a panic attack." And I just was swept in a shower of shame, and that hot sweat when you didn't see something coming. And it was the first time that I realized that everything that I'd been reading in those textbooks at uni, I studied psychology among other things, part of it was actually itemizing how my brain worked and how I was in the world. And it was only at that point that I started to have the inklings of the realization that maybe my brain was a little bit more of an overanalyzer and an overthinker than perhaps the people sitting on either side of me. And that's where the story basically began.
And when did you feel called to really figure it out for yourself? How to navigate that? Once you figure something like that out about yourself, you have to figure out what to do, right?
Well, you'd think. But the thing is, I went, "Oh, that was a terrible day, wasn't it?"
Oh, because you're normally perfect. And so that was obviously just this freak anomaly, and you were going to go back to normal now.
What a blip on the radar that was. Yeah, I went back to working hard and seeing my friends all of the time and planning for the next fun thing to do. And while it sort of lurked in the back of my mind, I didn't really give it too much time or attention. And then it was, again, many years later, I was getting on the train in Sydney when I've lived back here. And I remember stepping into the train, and as I stepped one foot into the train, I had that exact same feeling that I'd had many years before in Melbourne. And I went, oh no, this feels familiar. You're not dying. You're okay, but this is terrifying. And attempting to balance that out in my head a second time was much harder to do. It can't be a blip on the radar if it's happened a second time. And then when I was working very hard in my sort of previous life, in working in human resources, in corporate with suits and all of that sort of shebang, I worked so hard and I took on so many projects that I got to being that person where I knew all of the cleaners by name because we were the only people left in the office so late at night. And it just kept escalating and escalating. And if you keep taking things on, eventually something's going to give. And it all kind of crumbled all at once, where I went, wow, this is really unsustainable. I wish I could have avoided this, and I want to help other people avoid this. But to do that, I have to unravel my own story and my own background in all of this tightness and tension and paralysis that comes with being externally very confident and comfortable and inwardly secretly struggling.
And it's such an HR personality too, to want to help everybody else out there. And so what happens when you need to help yourself, which a lot of women do as well, notoriously. It's everybody else and you're last. And then now having conversations with men lately, it's not like anxiety is reserved for a special few. It's there to be experienced by all of us if the perfect storm presents itself. Sometimes it has something to do with us, sometimes with external influences, sometimes it's a melting pot of all of it. No one is immune. And so I think that's why I really love your book so much, Tammi, because it shows us just how many little situations in life, well, not all little, some really big, can be navigated. And I think the resilience piece in the modern day, where we're so careful. I mean, how many times would a mum say to their little person, careful, 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 you know, and we just put so many safety bubbles and barriers around ourselves in every sense of the word that our resilience sometimes, I feel, erodes. So I'd be interested to see whether that was part of your, you know, you had made yourself so safe in perfection that you didn't actually have the resilient flexibility to navigate when something wasn't right.
And I think what happened with me is a very common story amongst other people on different extremes and different volumes, that when we are perfectionists and when we are procrastinators, it really speaks to that element of control that we are striving for internally. And we can control an extortionate amount of things, really, until all of a sudden we can't, or until we're in a time such as a global pandemic where everything was previously controllable, all of a sudden isn't, you know. And so when things all of a sudden are outside of our grasp of being able to manage them and have all of our ducks lined up in a row, it can be a real shock to the system. And then it can really start to crumble our sense of self and our self-worth and how we present ourselves to the world, you know?
Absolutely. And so obviously you then go on to study people in even more depth than human resources has given you at this point, and you become a life coach. And I think that can be bandied about on social media quite a bit, but an actual qualified, certified life coach is a wonderful skill. It's like having a really amazing cheerleader who can ask you arresting questions when they need to be asked in your corner permanently. It's really quite an amazing profession. And I feel like the next question I want to ask you is, you start to help people like you once you've figured it out for yourself and you've started to build some tools that really work as a framework to support many people in corporate jobs and not. What were you feeling was missing in terms of toolkit? Like, had you started formulating these little steps that you build and show us in your book way back when? Was this something that built over time?
Yeah, it definitely was. I think being a life coach is just my ideal job, because you get to, exactly like you said, you get to ask those quite arresting questions that your family and friends often wouldn't ask, and you get straight to the point very, very quickly. And often if I've got somebody sitting in my office, sitting opposite me, or they're on a Zoom call and they say, you know, that they've got a 2 or 3 minute download of what's been happening during their day, and they're just feeling awful and they can't quite put their finger on it. And then you can ask just one question that gets right to the nucleus of what's going on for them. It is so disarming, so instantly, that often that in itself comes as a huge relief, because you feel seen. Somebody gets you. Somebody has pulled away all of the cloudiness of what's going on in your brain and your heart and your body, and they've asked one question, and you go, yeah, I am feeling like an imposter. How did you know? No. And so pulling together a lot of those questions that I've been asking over the last 6 years of running this business certainly has been part of the platform in building and pulling together the book.
Yeah, amazing. And so for those of you who haven't gotten a good visual of the book just yet, there it is. And it's got this super nifty little cover, it's like a children's book. Makes us feel safe, doesn't it? To feel like you've got a children's book. And yet it's anything but. This is so highly practical. And I think about the topic of anxiety, and I have read some books over time on mental fitness, resilience, anxiety, beating overwhelm, rushing modern women, all that kind of stuff. And often I think, gosh, another 70,000 words to try and wade through and extract what's really going to help me. And it can be exhausting if you're at a time when you're really just needing some tools. And this book is not the big 60, 70,000 word book. It's not the sexy 6-step protocol. It's not the anxiety be gone in 30 days book. We've seen all of those books on repeat, and yet anxiety is a larger problem than ever, statistically, if we look at mental health stats. So clearly, it's not helping to have huge books that we've got to try and wade through on this topic. Yours is very different. Talk to me about why you chose this format. And I'll just show everybody a little snippet of what it looks like. So you get a theme, and then you get some really basic steps to work through. Guaranteed, if you work through those steps, there will be shifts. I've tested it myself over the last couple of days. So how did you land here? Are you a visual person and that's what helped you? Or is it what you saw was helping clients, or a mix of both maybe?
A bit of all of those things. And I also am a massive bookworm and a big reader. And so I think I have read a huge majority of the books that are out there on anxiety. You know, I did a degree in it as well, so I've read a fair chunk about it. And exactly what you're saying, you know, if I was going through a really rough time or having a particularly uncomfortable paralysis tummy type kind of day, the last thing that felt helpful to me was to pick up a book that is this thick and start reading, because by the time I've used up my reading time. I've gotten halfway through the introduction and I've had no relief at that point.
Really going to help with that panic attack. I mean, I know this is a serious subject, but like you got to laugh about how ironic that is, really, right?
Oh my goodness, massively. And those books are really fantastic in laying a groundwork for how the brain works, what we can do in the long term, what is sustainable big term, year-long steps and we can take. But in my experience, I was already doing a lot of those things. You know, I'm a trained yoga teacher, I teach meditation, I do lots of regular things to manage anxiety. And like many people, I still had really dodgy days. And what could I do right then and there in that moment? And so after one particularly uncomfortable moment, I remember sitting there going, oh, I just wish the most lucid version of me was standing directly next to me going, Tammi, it's no big deal. I know you feel awful, but it's actually no big deal. All you got to do is this. You know this, right? Oh, yeah, I can do that. And I craved having that person standing next to me to say that, because if I'm having a day where I'm overanalyzing or a moment of overthinking or comparing myself to somebody else, I'm not in my most conscious, most kick-ass kind of brain moment, you know, and so I can't go through my filing cabinet and say, oh, this is the technique you need. So,
well, you use your prefrontal cortex abilities when you go into fight or flight, right? So there's the logic gone, and that's often why we can't help ourselves. We need that external clarity.
Oh, exactly. And our cortisol levels banging around at a much stronger amount than we used to. And so things that we can usually cope with, usually talk our way out of, it just can't happen if we're feeling quite anxious. And so a couple of weeks later, I went, I wish that person was standing there. If they could be, what would they say? And I literally pulled out my pencil and a notebook and I sat on the couch at home on my own, and I thought, well, these are the questions that I want that person to ask. And if I said yes to any of them, what would be the advice that I'd want to be given? And so I wrote all of that, and I used that very tatty notebook for about a year. And so each time I felt wobbly, uncomfortable, anxious, worried in some way, I'd pick up the book and it inevitably my anxiety would be neutralized. And I got to the point where I thought, this is really helping me. I think it might help other people too. So hence why I went down the publishing route. But as far as how these kind of decision tree style pages came about is I'm very yin yang. I've got a great deal of masculine thinking in me and a great deal of feminine thinking. You know, I am the daughter of a heart-filled mum and an engineering, logical-based dad. And I think somehow the two of those things trickled down to be able to put anxiety into such a way that you can deal with it in the moment by going through a flowchart and feel safe and secure and heart-filled at the same time.
Yeah, brilliant. And, you know, just talking through how in the moment we need something simple. And I just want to emphasize that I'm not in any way discounting any of the work that incredible people have done in the field of anxiety with the big books. But I was then just kind of had an aha where I thought, Tammi's book, there it is the short game, and then those others exist in the long game, you know, when you really want to work on some deep things and habit changes and building support networks and some of the things that take a lot longer and do require a bit more research and reading. And in all health endeavors, there's often a short game and a long game. think of people with depression who, oh, I don't want to take medication. Well, it's okay. It's your short game. And then let's figure out the long game. There's no shame in that. And I think how beautiful is that we now have a short game for worry, overwhelm, and anxiety, where we literally pick a page, any page, and I think I will do this, except for that one. If anyone would like to follow up when they have the book themselves, page 103 is quite entertaining. I'm just going to leave that one there. 103, page 103, not the page we're going to talk about. Okay. Are you doing an activity to gain someone else's approval? And so in the, we have the no, and if you're not, then you just go to the next page. But if you say yes, when you consider doing this activity for yourself and not for the other person's approval, would you still want to do it? And then there's like a little split off. Yes. Acknowledge any pressure you're feeling about impressing someone else. Inhale deeply, exhale this pressure. Continue on with the activity, keeping your own contentment and values at mind. I love that. It's just so simple. And if you actually just focus on the little bubble and those words in that moment, what's the word you use? Neutralise. And it really does neutralise. And then if you answer no to when you consider doing this activity for yourself and not for the other person's approval, do you still want to do it? And you say, actually, no, I don't still want to do this. And the advice there is gently stop this activity wherever you're at. And then remember, if your efforts and choices do not reach someone else's standards, you're still going to be okay. And so much of what we do is to rise up to the expectations of others in stuff that isn't even in our heart to do or feel fulfilled by. And there's an element of compromise. I think of, when you make the choice to be a parent, sometimes there are some things that you're doing for the approval of the teacher at school, or, we could think of tons of examples. But have you got something that comes to mind where you've done something to deliberately seek someone else's approval?
Oh my goodness, I think we all do.
Yeah, I'd love to, maybe when the Q&A opens up, people might be brave enough to share a scenario. What did you actually, do you have an example, I guess, of a time when you realised that, when you started to become a bit more happy to say no and a bit more self-confident as we all get older and tend to be able to do a little bit better, hopefully, if we've had that guidance and support network, where you actually just walked away?
Yeah, I think in the last couple of years, more and more there have been people who have said, I'd really want you to write an article for our website, for example. And I say, great. Do you have some sort of budget for that? Where are you at? And most of the time they say, oh, no. It's very good for exposure. And in some cases, that's great. I mean, that's what publicity is about. But in a lot of cases, it's probably not going to help the exposure. But the internal tug for me is I don't want them to not think I want to help them. I don't want them to not like me. I want them to still like my work. I want them to still sign up to my newsletter. I want them to still buy my book, whatever it is. And it's that internal conflict where you go, hang on a second, am I actually writing this article purely to make somebody who I don't know very well happy at the expense of my own time and boundaries and social life and health and wellness? Or is it something that actually I feel really called to do and I want to be a part of their community and it feels good to me? And that internal tug is sort of what prompted that 2-branch decision.
Yeah, brilliant. So, I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? And I find, I'm going to open up another one. Are you worrying about something that's out of your control?
Oh, hello, Corona.
Hello 2020. So so your options are no, turn to the next page. And by the way, if you're not worried, I would love to be you right now. Yes, get out a pen and paper. And I love the advice in this one. In 2 bullet point lists, write down what you can and can't control in this situation. And then for the list of what you can't control, visualize putting it into a long vacuum tube that sucks it up and deposits everything directly into the sky and out of your hands. And in doing that, just then, I actually pictured Donald Trump being sucked up in a tube and into the sky. That's literally what just came to my head. For the list of what you can control, do one tiny thing that boosts it, and then discard the piece of paper. And that, I think, is something so simple to overlook. But the idea of just doing one tiny thing on the list that you can control, we can all do that. We forget that we can do that. We're worried about climate change. When was the last time you planted something in the garden? You know, we're worried about fossil fuels. When was the last time you wrote to your local MP? You know, we can always do one little tiny, it doesn't have to be huge. We can swap out the shower gel for a bar soap if we're worried about the plastic crisis. And I feel like that worry is just almost glorified in our culture. Oh yeah, I'm worried, I'm busy, it's all hard. And I feel like this little page just helps us to have some agency.
Oh yeah, and by being able to do one small thing, we often actually end up getting quite a lot of momentum once we've done one small thing as well. You know, if I was worried about not eating particularly healthy, what is one small thing I can do? I can literally go and fill myself up a glass of water and drink it all. Oh, what a relief. I've done something towards my hydration for that day. And I didn't have to write a month-long meal plan, and I didn't have to go to the organic markets right now, and I didn't have to, you know, cover it past my husband and make sure that he wants to eat that too. You know, it's just one tiny thing. Or go and take the multivitamin that you've forgotten to take that morning. When you do one tiny thing, gosh, it takes the pressure off. And the other thing that it does is it gets us physically moving as well. And for so many of us, when we are feeling anxious or worried, we get physically tense. And so our shoulders often end up around our ears, our hands kind of turn into claws, we stop breathing, everything is tense and tight. And if we can physically get up, go and get that glass of water, or we go and pick up the phone and make that phone call that we haven't made so far, we've literally got our body moving, and that in itself can do a huge deal to be able to shift some of that tense energy that we're holding around and gritting in our jaw or in our teeth.
And that's so true. And I think one of the best things about the way that you've laid the book out, because some of the people out there might be thinking, so how am I going to find what I'm worried about right now? Am I going to have to leaf through like every single page? And it's really nifty because you've got the living and working section, you've got the socializing section, the relationship section, and the parenting section for people that's relevant to. So you can kind of just work through the pages of the section that's giving you the worry and anxiety right now, and use it as a feedback tool and a solution steps oriented diffusion tool, I think.
Oh, definitely a diffusion tool. And if you're ever feeling really uncomfortable, the first page says, don't know where to start where you are and turn the page. And so you just begin at the beginning until you feel better. But there are going to be some days where you're having some relationship wobbles, for example, and you can skip ahead and go straight to that section and say, you know, ask the questions of, are our values mismatching, or are my expectations too high of this person? And you can go straight to the point, figure out what you need to do, what your next steps are, or the conversations that you need to have, and then breathe easier once again. So,
yeah, nice. And something that I noticed when I was reading it yesterday, and I was looking at the socializing section, because it's a bit of a funky time for socializing. There's, you know, it's not normal. The time we're living in is just very far from normal. And what I noticed as I looked through each of the pages was I ended up feeling really good about myself because I got to turn the page on no quite a few times, like, oh, actually, I'm all good there. And that in itself was actually part of the neutralization of the overwhelm in that moment, if that makes sense.
To hear that. Yeah, I've had a similar experience when I've been doing it too. I've gone, oh, I'm actually not doing as bad as I thought I was.
Yeah, because you go, no, I'm all good there. Nope, I'm all good there. Oh, this is the page. You sort of...
yeah.
So I'm very thrilled to help you launch this into the world. Can I ask you, before we switch to the Q&A though, just a couple of little questions. How do we start to actually feel less shame, if you like, and more comfortable with the fact that worry, overwhelm and anxiety are actually quite a normal part of life? They will come and pay us a visit. Because I feel like, and you speak to this a lot with high functioning anxiety and the amount of clients that you help in that specific space, everything just has to be so perfect. And just like you on that panic attack day where you realized, actually, crap, I'm not perfect. I can't write a 10,000 word dissertation through this to get myself out of this yuckiness. I'm actually going to have to figure out a way to get through it and thrive. How do you see us starting to become more comfortable talking to our friends and family about not coping sometimes? It just seems like everyone's too scared to start saying so.
Yeah, and I think that's still really accurate. I mean, there's a reason why things like Are You Okay Day is so popular still, because it's still a bit of a taboo subject in a lot of circles. And I think when it comes to family and friends, particularly people who are in the high functioning anxiety space, which just, if you haven't heard that phrase before, it's basically when you've got all of those anxiety based symptoms, but outwardly you're still functioning at a really high level. You're still going to work. You've got great friendships.
You might not be able to pick it, basically.
Basically, it's hidden. Yeah. And so for people, particularly in that high functioning space, they're very conscious of how their behaviors affect other people. And so many times when I've spoken to clients and I've said, have you shared this with your family or your partner? And they go, oh, no. Nobody's even asked me until I came here. It's often because they don't want to put a burden onto somebody else. And they say, if I go to one of my friends and say, actually, I am really anxious and I've been this way for 2 months or something like that, they get really worried as to how that other person, one, is going to react, and two, whether they're going to know what to do or not, and three, if they might feel bad about sort of ladening them with that. For one, if they're a really good friend and they're a family member, we do have to accept that, one, they're going to want to help you, but secondly, they actually might not know how, and that's got to be okay. And they're going to help you in whatever way feels comfortable and familiar for them, but lowering our expectations of how people are going to help us and help support us, I think, is really important when we are reaching out for help. If that all feels a bit bamboozling, still reach out for help, absolutely. But taking some of the pressure off that one person maybe that you've told, they're probably not going to sweep in with a 6-step solution for you. Oh, great. I'm going to call them and make the appointment for you. While that would be amazing, those people exist, it's not that common. So taking off some of the expectations of the people around us is really important. And knowing that we need to have these conversations many, many, many times until some of the sting starts to come out of it. You know, I know that when I started to open up about the fact that I manage my own anxiety, it came as a massive shock to many people in my life. And I had to go through that process many times of saying, oh yeah, no, I know I still achieved that, or I still, I know I went overseas on my own, but I was really worried the whole time I was there.
Yeah.
And getting comfy with the fact that it's a lifelong conversation, as opposed to a one-off where we go and put a Band-Aid on and then we're
Oh, that friend's fine now. Yeah.
Oh yeah, she's got a psychologist. Cool. Okay, great. Don't have to worry about her. And the other lovely thing that has been my experience is when I've opened up and been vulnerable about the things that have been tricky to me, it often gives permission for the other person to say, oh, actually, I had something similar last week, last year, last decade. And it creates a much stronger bond between people. You know, as Brene Brown says, there is strength in vulnerability, and it takes courage and great deals of heart to say, squeak out in a lot of cases, actually, I know I look like I've got it all together, but actually I don't. I don't want your help to figure out the next step for me. I don't know what it is, but maybe you might be able to get me there.
Yeah, or maybe even just listening to me is going to be enough for me to feel like I can move forward.
Yeah, exactly.
And, you know, wouldn't that be beautiful if we all started to move towards a place where we give all of us, not just the good bits. You know, I always kind of smile when I share fails or mishaps on social media, and everyone's like, oh, thank you for being so real. I'm so glad, you know, you're such a good cook and you still burn something. And, you know, those kinds of people are just so desperately relieved when everyone is actually just normal with the good, the bad, the ugly, the great day, the crap day, the fail. You know, we've all got it. So we've all just got to start connecting in the full spectrum of life.
Oh, and, you know, I've definitely been one of those people who's sought out on social media a bit of a Instagram versus reality picture on low days. So where somebody's all airbrushed up and they've got the perfect pose and they've just nailed everything in that photo, versus a photo 20 seconds later where they haven't posed, the lighting is terrible, and they look like a normal person. There is something so refreshing about the humanity in people, particularly ones that we really admire as well.
I always think I'm relieved that you're not perfect either. It's like we all need a t-shirt.
We need your imperfections.
That's right. Well, Tammi, that kind of concludes our interview part of tonight. So I'm going to hand over to Emma if there have been any audience questions. And if there aren't, well, actually, you tell us, because I've got a couple of extra ones just in case.
There have been. So the first question is, Tammi talked about her family and support networks. My partner can sometimes suffer from anxiety, and I sometimes don't know the best way of supporting her. I'm sure that your partner is really supportive, so I'm wondering what are some of the things that your partner tells you that helps in times of panic?
He is the most magical, wonderful, lovely partner, and in saying that, he also really struggles with what to do in times of worry and panic, and if I'm feeling overwhelmed or have taken on too much in my to-do list. And so knowing that even if somebody's really good at this stuff, that they're not good, like Alexx and I were just saying, all the time is really important. And this is actually why I wrote the book, because we all need somebody or something, in this case a book, in our corner to be able to pick up in that exact moment and walk our way through it as well. If there are particular pages in the book, for example, that strike a chord and you find that your partner needs to be reminded of those, maybe what you could do is take a picture of those, save them in your phone, and have them ready to shoot across and send to them on the days when you think, oh, maybe they're feeling a little bit wobbly or uncomfortable. And the other thing is to ask lots of open questions to your partner and check in and not be afraid that there might be a non-desirable response. So, you know, if it's been a bit of a dodgy day or even a great day, say, hey, how was your day? What was the best bit? What was the not so good bit? And then whatever they say, ask more questions based on that and say, you know, you said last week that you had that difficult conversation with your boss. How did it go? How are you feeling about it? And having the courage to not shy away from asking questions that have an emotional charge to it, I think will set you up really nicely.
And it gets easier, right? Like,
oh yeah,
if you've traditionally not gone there on the ickier stuff, it's going to feel super uncomfortable to start with. But it's like a muscle. You work it out and it gets better, gets stronger.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The first couple of times it can be quite a lengthy conversation because there's a lot to be unearthed that hasn't been chatted through. But as this becomes more practiced, yeah, it becomes more of an everyday check-in, and where you can turn up the volume on the days where the things aren't going quite as well.
Thank you. We've got a few more questions. So the next is, I have an autistic son and he has panic attacks in social situations. Could the techniques in your book also be appropriate for autistic people?
Yes. In short, yes, they will be. One of the jobs that I used to have is I worked as a clinician over in the UK with both adults and kids who had all sorts of learning difficulties. So that was everything from dyslexia through to all of the unnameable, undiagnosable things. But the vast majority of people I actually worked with had autism, and a lot of those were kids. So yes, the vast majority of these techniques will work for somebody with autism, without a doubt. And once there is one thing that is going on, so once there is, let's say, ADHD or dyslexia or autism, the higher the chance is that something else will be going on as well. So it's referred to as a higher comorbidity rate, which means that if there is autism happening, there is a higher chance that something like anxiety might be occurring as well. The first chunk of the book, of the living and working part and the socializing part, is probably going to be the most relevant for your son. And some of these techniques actually I used back when I was a clinician in the UK, working with those adults and kids with autism. So if you give them a go, I'd love to hear how it works. What did work? What did you need to tweak so I can learn and iterate for later as well?
Awesome.
Thank you. We have another question here. I've had high function general anxiety disorder for as long as I remember, but I crave it. I don't like relaxing because I feel like I'm losing control. Will this book help with being able to feel okay to relax?
I hear you. I hear you. It's, for me, with my anxiety and the high functioning equivalent that I have, it is something that realistically I'll be managing forever. And that's something that I had to sort of get my head around and get okay-ish about. A lot of these, as Alex and I were just chatting about, a lot of these techniques were initially written because I was using them, or my clients were using them, most of which have high functioning anxiety. Being able to relax, a lot of people, I get a similar question to this quite regularly, and some people think that we almost have to relax en masse. You know, if we're going to relax, we're going to a yoga retreat, and boy, oh boy, am I going to be zen. You know, and I'm going to be zen for 7 days straight. And I'm going to think about anything else. And it actually ends up putting so much pressure on that individual that it's a blocker to them being able to relax in the first place. So what we'd be aiming for is smaller snippets of relaxation to begin with. And as time goes on, those can be extended by iterating them bit by bit, getting them bigger and bigger. The techniques in this book do go hand in hand with relaxation, and the vast majority of them are balancing out your nervous system, which means that it's calming down your whole mind and your body. And I think it will be a nice introduction or to add on to any of the relaxation attempts or things that have worked for you in the past.
Thank you. Next question is, Tammi, do you tell people at work that you have anxiety, or do you keep it under wraps? Part of me wants to be out as part of diversity and inclusion, but tons of folks are still super discriminatory. Thoughts?
Oh, what a great question. Now I do, because it's very much part of what I speak about on a regular basis. But does it concern me every so often that people know that that's something that's going on for me, and maybe will they underplay what I'm saying, thinking, oh, is she just being anxious again, or is she overreacting? It definitely plays into my mind to a certain extent, but that's I'm okay with that, because it feels so much freer to me to be sort of out and loud and proud and saying, hey, this is a part of who I am. This is a part of how I interact with the world. And actually, it's got a lot of great gifts in it as well. Does it have downsides? Boy, oh boy, yes, it does. But having to hide that and make it a secret consistently and ongoing takes up so much emotional bandwidth and so much energy that, for me, my choice is to not keep it secret. In some work environments, it's going to be harder than others if people are more closed off and aren't as exposed to mental health challenges and the way different people's brains work. But I also look at it as being a bit of an ambassador for all of this. You know, I'm going to be the brave one, so maybe it helps somebody coming behind me. So it's a choice. And you could start by telling 1 or 2 people, see how you feel, and then add on until most people know, and then you can go from there.
Great, thank you. And the last question that we've had is about female participation in these sort of discussions. So this person is asking, they're saying that women seem to outnumber men by big margins. Is there a worry that there is an imbalance in society between the genders thinking about this issue?
Well, there actually is a difference in the genders when it comes to anxiety. So in Australia, the latest research is that 1 in 3 women will experience diagnosable anxiety at least one point in their life, which is huge, versus 1 in 5 for men, which is also still huge, but that is quite a big shift in the comparison between the two. So by default, there's always going to be more women asking more questions around this particular topic of anxiety. And the other thing to consider is that it is more common for women to ask for help in any circumstance, because that's a little bit how we're wired and how society is used to functioning. So I would love for that to shift and change, and the more that we chat about this stuff and the more that we include our dads and brothers and uncles and male friends and help them feel like they've got a soft place to land, all the better.
Lovely, thank you so much. Well, that is the last of our questions that we've had this evening. So before I take everybody off mute so that they can join me in thanking you both, Alexx and Tammi, for such a brilliant discussion tonight, I just want to check if you have any final questions or comments that you would like to ask before I open up the Zoom room.
No, go ahead and open it up. Let's all congratulate Tammi on her launch.
Yes, lovely. All right, everybody is off mute. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight and for your great questions.
How nice. Oh, that's so nice. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For jumping on board.
Have a lovely evening, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.